Programming Throwdown, episode 66, Code Reviews. Take it away, Jason.
Hey everyone, this is our double for this month because of my illness last month. And one thing I did last month, even though I was quite sick, I was able to assemble a 3D printer, which was actually super, super fun. I went on GearBest, which is some Chinese distributor, and I ordered a 3D printer kit. It was literally just bags of screws and wires and rods and like this thing that had been cut out of acrylic, like a bunch of little acrylic pieces, and some stepper motors that you could have got just right off the shelf at Fry's or something. But it came with the whole kit, and it was very daunting. I mean, the thing that scared me the most was at one point I pulled out of the box like a 120 volt like plug that would plug into the wall, and the other end was just 3 bare wires.
Don't stick them to your tongue.
Yeah, and I just thought, I mean, I'm not one of the people that like put paper clips in the sockets when I was younger or something. And so that whole like, everything related to like electrical work, I just have no familiarity with. But I just dove in. I knew that there were going to be a lot of good resources, and there are just an incredible amount of resources on how to do it. There's tons of videos from different angles, different people doing it. And I built it, and it actually worked. It was a little bit scary. The first time I turned it on, smoke started pouring out.
Oh, no.
And basically, I had some of the copper strands of the 120 volt had touched each other and completed a circuit and like melted part of the thing, but it was okay. The part it melted wasn't a big deal.
That doesn't sound okay.
Yeah, it was super scary. I was pretty sure I destroyed it. I got extremely lucky. Part of it too is as soon as I saw a bit of smoke, I unplugged it. So that was the first issue. The second issue was the way it works. If you've never seen a 3D printer, you have 2 stepper motors, and you have these 2 cables that make one makes the platform go towards you and away from you, and one makes the printer head go to the left and to the right. But the part that makes the printer head go up and down, that needs to be very, very accurate. And so you can't have just a plastic cable for that. Also, gravity is constantly putting tension on it. So for that, they have these 2 metal rods that are threaded, kind of like a screw, but you're not screwing it into anything. It's just 2 cylinders that have a thread, and they plug into 2 stepper motors, and they both turn kind of in sync. And so the idea is when you turn both of these screws together, it kind of makes this whole kind of platform rise up, and when you turn them the other way, it makes it rise down. And I guess those rods needed some WD-40 or some grease or something, and so I didn't do that. There's just like the friction was causing everything to get messed up. It wasn't, the left and the right side weren't rising up the same. So there's basically, long story short, there were several times where I felt like I was out the $220, and I felt like it was just, I tried it, it's ruined, whatever, I felt kind of bad about it because I wasted the money. But then in the end, I finally got it to work. It was just super, super satisfying.
So what have you been making?
Yeah, so I printed a couple of things just to make just like some functional things. Like I printed something to hold my watch, like on the dresser and things like that. I had this crazy idea that I've had for a while, and I finally got to implement it. I went on Thingiverse and I found models of lions and bears and other animals. And at first I 3D printed them, and my son got to play with them, and he thought it was super cool. And then I actually went in Blender, which is a 3D editing software, and I sort of detached the head. I decapitated all of these animals. And then I made the head a screw and the body like a thread. And so you can actually screw off the lion head and screw it onto a bear body. I did it kind of haphazardly. So when you screw the head on, it doesn't screw on straight. So all the animals look like they're kind of turning their head, like they're all looking over their shoulder. but it's still really fun. And my son and I, we got a huge kick out of it.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, it was great. I highly recommend doing it, especially if you're in high school or college, or if you don't have a lot of experience with electrical stuff. This is a great way to get started. It was something that actually worked, which is for me and mechanical things, that was a rarity.
Well, except for that part where you almost burned your house down.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, be
When I
really
say
careful
work, I use
of
it loosely.
AC mains voltage out of your wall. It's no joke.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I was pretty sure that I was going to destroy something like fundamental in my house. And I was pretty close to doing that.
All right.
Don't do this without supervision. If you're in high school or something, have your dad help you or your mom help you, or have a friend over, someone who could put it out with a fire extinguisher or something.
Words of endorsement from Jason. All right. Well, time for the news. My first link is the Competitive Programmer's Handbook. This is a PDF compiled by someone named Antti, and I won't attempt the last name, who compiled a whole bunch of tips and tricks and algorithms for the kinds of things you would need to be able to do if you wanted to do competitive programming. Now, you may say, well, competitive programming is starting a company and competing against all the other people starting a company in order to do better. But competitive programming, I think in this context, refers to programming competitions where a bunch of programmers gather together and get assigned puzzles and problems and a time limit in which to solve them. And the sort of fastest to be able to solve the problems is the winner. And there's a sort of points, sometimes based on the difficulty of the problems. The exact structure of the competition can vary. But sometimes I think I did a couple of these when I did my computer science stuff in high school. I think like my senior year maybe. But I think most people get experience with this in college. The ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, runs a really big programming competition each year. And
yeah, I mean, the thing to keep in mind is that like there's sort of this like family of people who compete and then grow up and like grow older and become judges and then become problem writers. And so, it means that there's like a specific niche of computer science that's going to cover like 90% of the problems that you see in competitive programming. And so even if you might be a super strong CS student, but you also have to study the competitive programming world because it dives really deep into a handful of areas and doesn't cover other ones. So,
right. So, and sometimes the problems can be quite tricky. The sort of most obvious solution will definitely not work, and you need to understand sort of why it won't work and figure out what the trick is to it. And in that way, it becomes a puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a bunch of these programming competitions in college. I think it's great. It's a great experience. But as I said, there's sort of this hidden like gnosis around it. And so it's really important to study. And this is actually a great resource because it really covers it in a lot of detail. And it's a great way to kind of get familiar. And a lot of the interview questions at companies, kind of are modeled after competitive programming assignments mostly because of the time limit. Like you have maybe an hour to solve a problem in a competitive situation, and you have an hour or even half an hour to solve a problem in an interview. And so they kind of end up converging a little bit there. So this would also help, your interview skills.
Yeah, and I think also just becoming comfortable with a lot of the algorithms that are necessary for the programming competitions are really helpful for the interviews as well.
Yeah, totally.
Like for the reasons you said, the kind of depth you get into is about the same between the two because you just don't have much time to kind of write architected code per se. It's mostly about sort of getting to the coding the algorithm. But I will say most of the things in this book, sort of especially the later half, are things like it would be awesome to understand and to do well in programming competitions are probably needed, but you would be unlikely to encounter these on a programming interview unless it was a really tough interviewer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would actually be surprised to even find really any dynamic programming and things like that in an interview. But yeah, I mean, these are like super advanced things.
But definitely a great resource. And if you're interested in or are currently doing programming competitions, check it out. Also, we do recommend I forget the name of the other one, but Top Coder is a website that has programming competitions. And there's also
HackerRank is another one.
And so those are also good resources to gain practice, apply the knowledge you learned from this book, that kind of stuff, but also to prepare for programming interviews. We get that question a lot from listeners. So
yeah, I helped someone about a month or two ago, and he asked me for help interviewing at a company I used to work at, and I told him, I said, let's just open up HackerRank and start solving problems. And I still think that's the best way to go about it. And if you don't have a lot of experience with competitive programming, then chances are, even if you're really good at CS, you're gonna have a hard time with something like HackerRank, which is kind of the point. Like it's good to see, what sort of knowledge gaps there are, and there's great documentation. Most of these sites give you the answer along with an editorial and things like that. So. Cool. So I'm going to talk about C++ 17, and so we'll give a link to it. A lot of new features, a lot of cool stuff coming out. It's amazing because I remember C++ 11 being just super, super delayed and having to rely heavily on Boost. Like if you wanted even just threading, you had to use Boost. And I think C++ 11 was originally supposed to be C++ 08, if I remember correctly. We could probably find out from our old episode. It took till 11 to get it out the door, but now here we are with a 14 and a 17, and it's actually almost getting to the point where unless you're really heavy into C++, you can start to lose track of the latest features. But yeah, there's some really cool stuff here, and we've provided a link so you can kind of check it out, like the latest and the greatest C++ stuff.
I feel like we should enter into a segment where we discuss our favorite feature from the new. No, I'm just kidding. That's
I mean, the one I use the most, and this is covering all of the extensions, is the I totally forgot. I think it's called the range operator. Basically, it's where
list
you do
comprehension.
Is that what it is? It's where you do like 4x : vector, and then it saves you from having to write the whole for loop.
I call it list comprehension, but I don't know if that's
there's a bunch.
I think I know it's called that in other languages.
Yeah, that and the threading, like going from Boost threading to just the C++ threading, it's literally just changing. It's a regex, right? But I had a bunch of code and still have now. I'm producing a bunch of code that uses threads, and it's good that that's just baked into the language because it's so important.
The other thing from C++ 17 that's nice is they're continuing to support sort of extra features in the const expressions. So if you write a lot of const expressions, which can be compile time evaluated, before it was very strict what could be in them, and now there's increasing things that are added to the list of what can be in them, which is good.
Cool. Yeah, doing more like type inferencing.
So my next news article is called Simple Chess AI. This is an article that was posted on, I guess, somebody's Medium platform, Free Code Camp. Anyways, we'll have a link in the show notes. And I came across this, but it was really interesting because a lot of people, of course, artificial intelligence is in the news a lot, and it means lots of different things to lots of different people. So I don't think there's any neural networks, or there are no neural networks in this example, but they basically take a kind of minimal JavaScript implementation of playing chess and have it already set up for you to kind of plug and play your sort of move evaluator, the opposing player, the computer player. And I thought it was really cool because I've always, thought to myself, like, I should make a, chess bot or something that plays chess. But then it's always like the setting up a representation for the board and having a visualizer. It's a lot of work to get to the thing you're trying to do. And so I thought this was a particularly compact setup. I probably could have gone and found something at some point if I had been serious about it. But it comes along with the tutorial where they take you first simply being able to make valid moves, then being able to, talk about what the tree of possible moves would look like and how to evaluate that, and then how to prune that tree so that you can go farther down the tree, which means in this case, farther down the tree is further into the future of potential moves. And that way, the more you can trim as these paths aren't good, then the farther down you can go, the farther in the future can look, and the more sort of predictive your engine becomes, and being able to be a little more strategic than just tactical. And then, sort of how do you have heuristics for the relative point values of the pieces, or what about different pieces are more or less important depending on where they are on the board, and how do you sort of encode that? It goes through a lot of it, actually. I mean, I'm not a great chess player, so I'm pretty sure the AI that ends up by the end could probably beat me pretty handily. But I thought this was a very kind of interesting introduction on how to do sort of game AI.
Yeah, totally. I mean, even just a player, like a simple heuristic like this with a 8-move look ahead will make an expert player that would beat almost everyone who's not a competitive player.
Yeah, chess is hard.
Yeah, chess is a hard game to play.
But Go is harder, so
That's right.
I guess we should really be upping the limit here in writing simple Go AIs.
That's hard to do. Yeah, the thing about chess is you can, even 8 moves ahead or 6 moves ahead, you can exhaust all the possible actions with this pruning in mind. But with Go, I mean, at every board state, you have hundreds of actions.
Yeah, the branching factor is much higher.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we'll put that in the show notes.
Cool.
Check it out if it sounds interesting.
Yeah, this looks awesome. I mean, it's as Patrick said, step by step. So there's nothing stopping you from coding this up yourself, and reading just by following this tutorial and having some understanding of like a Python or C++ or something like that.
I know another
Very
classic
cool.
example people do are make the worst possible chess AI. So make an AI that loses as fast as possible.
Oh, really? Did you see the worst Overwatch player article?
No.
So basically, I mean, it's a little bit of a tangent, but Overwatch had a formula. It's probably some variant of ELO or something to decide people's rank. But it's a formula. It's not like the top 10% of people are rank 1, so on and so forth, right? It's not like that. And so there's the worst. I think the worst rank is rank 1. So I think 1 is the lowest. And there's a person who he made it his personal mission to get to rank 1. And people had thought it wasn't even possible. And he basically, he actually like walks through, like in the beginning, he's playing with pretty competitive people because I guess initially he was really good. And the people were like pretty mature and nice. And he was losing all these games. And then he got to like the middle. And when he got to about a little worse than average, the people became trolls. So basically like all the trolls are the people who are like slightly worse than average. That's like where most of the trolls are. And then when you get even worse, it's a lot of bots. It's people who have just written scripts to play the game, or not even play the game, participate in the game so that they can get the loot afterwards. And he had to like lose the bots, which is really hard to do. So he spent a ton of time like trying to force himself to lose. And he did eventually get to rank 1, but it's a really cool story.
But isn't that sort of that describe that hierarchy? That's, I guess, I've been on the bad end of that, which is coming into a game, not when it first comes out, but, after a little while and people have been talking about it. And I sort of say, I'll check this out. But of course you come into it as sort of a worse than average player, hopefully. And then what happens is you start playing and you're sort of playing with the people, like you said, who are the trolls, who just go from game to game or whatever and like being the worst. And there may really be a good community above that, but you never really get to experience it because you can easily get turned off of the game by the kind of bad experience at the low level.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real problem. It's just hard to know how to solve that. But yeah, that's, I mean, maybe the way to solve it is to have some kind of hybrid game where, you could have a mix of good and bad players, and the bad players don't ruin the game for the good ones. But that's you'd have to design the whole game around that.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, but in the meantime, you can tell if you're really in a slump in a game because people start
Trolling
becoming really rude. When people become really rude to me in Rocket League, I know that I'm on a big losing streak. So my article is actually so a security enthusiast found the kill switch for the WannaCry ransomware, and I'll kind of cover all of this. And I don't have all the details. Actually, Patrick, you probably know a lot more than me on this. But WannaCry is this. It's some kind of Trojan or virus, but basically it takes over your computer, and then you have to pay, Bitcoin, like anonymous money, to an anonymous source to get your computer back. And it spreads through some way that I haven't looked into. I'm assuming it's some kind of maybe over email or Facebook or something. And the thing about it is, I guess when the person was testing it, or maybe just as a kill switch for themselves or what have you, there's a certain domain name, and it's a nonsensical name. It's www dot and then a bunch of characters .com, and he would send a request to that domain name, a web request, and if it came back with a certain response, then the virus didn't activate. So even though you had the virus on your computer, it wasn't doing anything. If he sends a request to this domain and he doesn't get anything back, then the virus kicks in, like it locks your computer down. It also tries to spread the virus, so on and so forth. And somebody who was looking at the virus, decompiling the virus executable, found this logic. And so he went ahead and registered that domain, which is by itself surprising. Like if you were a hacker, why wouldn't you register this domain already, right? But I guess maybe that would incriminate you. But this person registered that domain, and he had it return the appropriate result. He built his own web server that did that, and he basically stopped this virus, which is remarkable.
Yeah, it's still unclear why the stuff had that kill switch in it, like why it was doing that. There's like a lot of speculation. But I guess the person who did it originally wasn't sure what would happen because code's complicated, but he did it as an experiment and noticed it. Sure enough, it stopped the code from work. Like it stopped the virus from installing itself, from from encrypting the computer and putting up the ransom message.
Yeah, exactly. The only thing I could think of is, it's very hard to sort of test viruses. That would be my guess, because even if you're in some kind of virtual machine, you probably have to log in with some kind of credentials, and especially when you get to testing it on other machines. And it probably wrote this as a way to keep from accidentally locking themselves out of their own computer. But yeah, I guess for whatever reason they chose, or maybe just forgot and they didn't take it out, and saved a lot of people a huge headache.
I wonder how many people have attempted to write ransomware and ransom their own computer.
Yeah, I know, right? My guess is probably not that many.
You have to be pretty skilled, so you probably know to be really careful.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like the virtual machine can emulate things so well that there's not really a reason to do it. But, it could be the kind of thing where, if you're careless even once, you're totally hosed. Or maybe you just pay yourself a Bitcoin and it doesn't matter.
Oh, there you go. That's true. Until that code's not working right. And then...
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I always wondered, it's like, do the worms and viruses, are they pretty well tested or not really? Because if it's not well tested, you have a problem, because it sort of gets out and then people will patch their systems and you may not accomplish the goal you want because you have unintended consequences, or takes down your server that's supposed to be doing whatever. But then if you test it really, really, really well, do you really care if 10% of people's computer crash instead of doing what you want?
Right. Yeah, it's at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But then it actually gets back to our chess AI example. The branching factor becomes really, really important. And so even if 1% of people don't spread the virus, it ends up having a huge impact. So yeah, my guess is probably they're tested pretty well. But
I think different than
really
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I want to say it's sort of different though. I get off on a tangent, but it doesn't matter the order of people being infected per se. If you don't spread it to me, but Bob spreads it to me, that's just as bad for me. I don't care that it came from you or Bob.
Yeah. I guess the question there is then what is the density of that graph? If I don't spread it to you, what are the chances someone else is going to know you or something like that? But yeah, actually the real thing I'm curious about is who are these people? I think in general, it's usually state sponsored. It's government programs of various countries that are doing this.
Well, I think Microsoft came out, if I recall, because it was it was on Windows, and came out and said that this was a result of I think one of the WikiLeaks or something that revealed the cache of hacker tools that were used.
The NSA thing we talked about. We actually talked about that 2 shows ago.
Yeah, and they found that apparently whatever this flaw was found in there, and so people exploited it to make this, or at least that was the accusation. I don't know enough and didn't read enough about it to know if that was sort of proved out or accurate. But
gotcha. Yeah, I read something Yeah, I read something along those lines. So yeah, I guess that those leaked tools were legit. Maybe not from the NSA or whatever, but at least they were. It's definitely they were powerful tools. There's no doubt about that.
Time for
Cool.
book of the show.
Book of the show. My book of the show is very limited time, so definitely jump on this. Let me see how many days are left. There's probably by the time the show publishes, there'll be about a week left. So jump on this quickly. It's the Humble Bundle for Make Essentials for Maker Faire. So basically, it's just a ton of books about building stuff. So there's books all about getting started with 3D printing that I probably should have read before I burn my house down. There's books about designing a good workspace, how to make 3D models that you can then print. There's all sorts of like electrical, robotics, like build your own robot kind of thing, microcontrollers, Linux, and you can get a ton of books. You can actually get a ton of books for $1 total. If you pay $8, you get twice as many, and if you pay $15, you get 3 times as many books. But yeah, definitely check it out. It's an amazing deal. All of these Humble book deals are phenomenal.
I just still have problems. Like, I guess ebooks have never really clicked with me. I've read a couple, but I get too distracted.
Oh yeah, I'm thinking about it. Like the fiction ebooks I've definitely read a bunch of. As far as like ebook references, yeah, you're right. I have a decent amount of ebook references, but I don't read them too much. But maybe it's just I don't read reference books
Yeah, that's fair.
that much,
That's fair.
unless I'm really stuck.
Well, my book is a massive tome of fiction called The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. And this is book 1 of the Stormlight Archive, which is, if I've previously recommended the Mistborn series. And it turns out I didn't actually know this at first, but The Way of Kings is apparently in the same book literary universe. I don't know how you say that. So it's not sort of, the books don't, at least as far as I know, don't really have anything to do with each other, but they exist in sort of the same ecosystem of stuff that Brandon Sanderson calls the Cosmere universe.
Okay.
So I don't know. So there's sort of magic in the books, and the magic isn't the same as that from Mistborn, but it kind of is similar in a way. There's also another book called Elantris that is apparently also set in this sort of Cosmere mythos. And but all that's to say that it's by Brandon Sanderson, who I've recommended several times, and I think he does a really good job of writing. This book is very long. I don't know how long it is in pages because I listened to it, but the listening to it, I believe it was, I should have looked it up right before I did this, but I think it's like 30 hours, I want to say, or something like that. So it's definitely lengthy. Oh, no, I was completely wrong. It's 45 hours, almost 46 hours.
Wow, it's like 4 times the size of a normal book.
46 hours, yeah. So it's definitely a big book. Let's see if I can figure out how big the hardcover is. So it's 46 hours, very long, but I really, really enjoyed it. In fact, I have a bunch of other books, and I wanted to go get the second book just because I was so into it. But I was like, I've been burned before. After listening to like 45 hours straight, to go into another 45-hour book, you kind of get a little burnt out by the end. And so it's best to sort of
1,280 pages.
Yeah, big. But I definitely recommend it if you're into long form fiction, at least. If you do mostly sort of short stuff, maybe this is not the best first book because it's quite long. But if you like sort of long, I actually like really long form science fiction and fantasy. I'm in the middle of another very long book by Neil Stevenson, and I'm enjoying it. Although this one is starting to drag, so I'm not sure. Maybe I need to go on to a short book kick. But anyways, The Way of Kings. I know I didn't say anything about what it is because I never know how to talk about stuff without spoiling it. So
yep, totally makes sense.
Check it out. It's a fantasy book. I guess I mentioned there's some magic. That's good. I could read like the back page, but you could just do that for yourself on the internet. But if you like Brandon Sanderson, or you like fantasy, and you have probably already checked it out because the book is like 5 years old, I think, at this point. But if you haven't, I give it my recommendation.
Very cool. And you can listen to that book on Audible. And Audible is also a sponsor of Programming Throwdown. You can go to audibletrial.com/programming throwdown. and sign up. You get a month free. You get a free book, and if you use that special URL, then you help out the podcast.
And I will say 46 hours seems to be a good value for me for that Audible credit.
$15 for 46 hours. Yeah, definitely. I'm actually reading a book. I won't spoil it, but about a third of the way done. And I actually read some books that Patrick had recommended in the past on Audible since I got my account. I read 0 to 1, and a couple other books, and I think it's great. I've actually switched over to that. I can kind of rest my eyes when I'm on the shuttle. And
nice. So do you go back do you go back to the old show notes and look at my recommendations? And then I didn't know you were doing this. I feel complimented.
That's exactly what I did. Yeah.
Have I been a good recommender?
You have. Well, I've read some of your recommendations already, just on ebook. But yeah, I picked up some of the ones that you recommended that I hadn't already read and got them on Audible. But yeah, in general, I like your recommendation. I'm not into sci-fi, so I don't usually read the fiction books. But yeah, I feel like your recommendations are solid. It's super interesting. We're also on Patreon, so you can go patreon.com/programming throwdown. You can give us a shout out, send us a message. You can also set up a donation, like become a Patreon to Programming Throwdown. We really appreciate that. At the end of the year, every year, we take any money left over after our server costs and everything else, and we give out free T-shirts to people who are subscribers. Check it out. We also publish a separate RSS feed there that has a bit more bandwidth. So if you're a subscriber, you can use that RSS feed.
Yep. Time for Tool of the Show.
Okay, so my tool of the show has a bit of backstory. While I was buying this 3D printer from China, I also noticed China has a bunch of other stuff for sale that is super cheap.
You fell down a rabbit hole.
Yes, it is a rabbit hole. And I bought a tablet. I've been wanting this for a long time. I've been wanting a gigantic tablet. I wanted a tablet so big that I could read an 8.5 by 11 research paper, at scale. That was the goal. But I don't want to spend a lot of money. I could get like an iPad Pro, but I think it's like $1,200 or something for the big one. Or maybe it's like $1,000, but it's still a lot of money. So a Chinese drop shipper was shipping a 12-inch Android tablet. It actually runs Android and Windows.
What? Huh?
It dual boots. Yeah, isn't that wild? When it starts up, it has use the volume up and volume down button to choose whether you want Windows or Android.
Whichever you're feeling that day.
Yeah. And it's amazing, unfreaking believable. And it was only $200
for
this huge tablet, this beautiful screen. The only catch, it runs a fork of Android. And if you just put stock Android on it, the touchscreen doesn't work. I saw that from reading the internet. So I have to leave the version of Android on. And it also has Chinese spyware. It had this thing called AdUps. That I've read on the internet. I haven't verified, but according to the internet, it like logs your keystrokes, like your keyboard touches. So when I found that out, I was super bummed. I thought I had this paperweight, or at least I was going to have to highly regulate my usage. But then I found this program called Deep Loader. So you run this on your desktop with an Android device plugged in. And even the factory level services, you can turn them off. You can't uninstall them because you don't have root access, but you can disable them. You could disable their connection to the internet. You could turn them off entirely. And so I ran this Deep Loader, and I turned off AdUps on my tablet. And the other thing I found out is a lot of these lesser named brands, like the BLU Blue Android phones, and some of these other Chinese brands, which have sold just millions and millions of devices in the US, have this spyware on them. And so if you have, if you have one of the major ones, like if you have a Motorola or a Samsung, you're fine. But if you bought, either for yourself or for your family, one of these like other brands, like Blue or Chewy or one of these Chinese brands, then run this Deep Loader. Or even if you didn't, run the Deep Loader, and I think all Verizon phones also have some type of logging system that it doesn't log keystrokes, like it's not that invasive, but you could disable it with this program.
So have you been reading research papers on your gigantic tablet?
I have. Yeah, it's really nice. I have an app called Moon Reader. It's kind of expensive. It's like $5 for a PDF reader. So, it seems kind of like a waste, but it's amazing. It lets you annotate on the PDF pretty easily. It'll actually switch to night mode, and it'll invert the colors of the PDFs. Like even the pictures, the colors will be kind of inverted. Ooh. And it makes the pictures kind of strange, but for a research paper where you're really just looking at graphs, it's okay. And it makes it much easier on their eyes and everything. So yeah, it's really nice.
My tool of the show, predictably, is an iPhone app. I don't actually think, well, I should say an iOS app, because I know it's on the iPad as well, but it didn't look like it was available, at least not yet, for Android devices. And this is Card Thief. This is by the same company that created Card Crawl, which I think I've recommended before. If not, it's also a cool game to check out. I think it's a couple dollars. And Card Thief is a strategic card game. Oh, no, it does say it's on Android. Okay, cool.
Yep,
so
I just looked it up. It's on Android.
All right, cool. I feel bad. Didn't want to leave those people out. Anyway, so this is a strategic card game where you are sort of a thief sneaking around buildings, trying to avoid lights and guards, and trying to get to the exit, all while sort of managing your stats so that you can get good scores, pick up loot, all that kind of stuff. And I thought it's sort of fun to see a card game that I have several implementations of real card games that I've played, but it's interesting to see people simulating playing a real card game, but in a way where it'd be like this card game would never exist in real life because it'd be too tedious or too much bookkeeping that no one would ever really want to play it. It's just sort of an interesting genre. And anyways, check out Card Thief. There's other games as well that I play where I didn't like the idea of it in a real board game, where I'd played things similar and just like sort of the tediousness of it made it not interesting to me. But then playing on the iPad, you can sort of sit down and it like shuffles for you. It keeps track of all of your statistics. It makes sure you don't sort of break the rules by accident. So some games that are really fun, but sometimes are sort of easy to mess up, or make great iPad or just great app implementations.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, especially like Agricola and these games that have just so much going on. It's so much more fun on the iPad.
But it's so fun to move all those bits of wood around in Agricola. I don't know what you're talking about. The app doesn't do it for me. I don't know why. It's just like I love moving the little bits around, but it does make it hard to get to the table.
I actually think, if I just had an app where I could take a picture of the board at the end and it would calculate the score, that's all I really need.
Fair enough. All right.
Cool.
Well, time to talk about code reviews. This is going to be an exciting and most thrilling topic ever. I
think the interesting thing about this is, if we talk about, let's say, Python, you're going to learn it in college or maybe even in high school. And you're going to go into your first software engineer job probably already knowing Python. But this is something that, like, it's a chicken and an egg. Like, you can't really know it until you've done it, or until someone kind of covers the whole process. And a lot of colleges, we had a college course called Software Architecture, and it was it really should have covered things like code reviews, but it didn't. So we actually didn't really get a taste for code reviews and merging and releasing code and these things until we got into industry. And so hopefully Patrick and I are going to change that right now.
Yeah, I guess I knew it existed, but anyways, I didn't really know what it was. And it's actually surprising to me. A lot of companies don't have good code review systems or aren't even practicing code review, which is kind of crazy to me. So I felt like this was a good opportunity to talk about, there's a bunch of reasons why you wouldn't want to do it, but there's a whole lot more reasons why you would want to do it. And I personally, like at this point, feel that if I don't get code review, I feel like I'm not done yet. Like I feel like you're not done until you write at least some amount of unit tests and get code review.
Yep, totally.
Anyways, so I already was talking about implying why you would do code review. So one of them is get someone else to look at your code. I mean, there's a lot of times where I've written things that were sort of bad assumptions and even kind of passed unit tests because I also wrote my unit test from the sort of same point of view. And someone else will point out like, what in the world are you doing here? And it's really important to get another pair of eyes for several reasons. One, you can miss stuff. to, as an engineer, I feel like and I was describing this to someone, is like, I feel like good engineers are very, very open about what they do. They don't try to keep secrets. They don't try to keep hidden kind of like methods. They are very open, very sharing. And part of that is that way, and this sounds bad, but everyone can share in the blame, which is like when something goes wrong, it's not just the person who wrote the code's fault. It's the process's fault. It's the people who reviewed the code. And that sounds like you're trying to look for ways to blame other people, but it's not. It's about some of the stuff we do is almost too important for just one person to be doing. And so really you need to have more sets of eyes on that. And code review is a great way to do that and have a understanding about the process of going from writing code and getting it deployed and shipped.
And I mean, also people want to do different things. I mean, if you keep this, chunk of code to yourself, then you have to be its babysitter for as long as you work at that company.
Well, some people see that as an advantage, but
well, we're talking about good software.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been hard pressed to find a situation where that was truly good. So
yeah, I mean, there's people who say, oh, it's job security if I'm the only person who knows the code base. It really doesn't work that way. Like, it's pretty easy to rewrite stuff from scratch. It might not be easy, for a person to do it, but for a company, it's pretty easy. And it's much better to, as Patrick said, be open and write the best possible code rather than try and optimize for job security.
Yeah, and along exactly the same lines is you really want to be able to, it's the, bus insurance. It's like if someone on your team walks out on the way home and gets hit by a bus, you want to make sure you know what they're doing. And one of the good ways to do that is through code review, because other people on the team will be seeing the code that person is writing and, understanding what they're doing. Also sort of prevents people from just kind of not ever paying attention to what you do. And so make sure that people sort of have visibility into the work you're doing, good or bad, but hopefully the good work that you're doing. And so they can kind of like, help recommend you when performance reviews come around or whatever. Now,
makes sense.
There are some definite caveats. So things where code review can go wrong. So one of them is you can get people on your team who, for one reason or another, like to slow things down, or they want to land something, they want to check in some code before you get it in. And so they start to try to be kind of a roadblock. And one of the symptoms of this is people who get really, really nitpicky about very, very small things like, the grammatical structure of your comments, or, in code review is not the time to decide whether your company is going to use or your team is going to use tabs or spaces. I mean, those code reviews do not work well for those things. Those should be decided, I guess we call it side channel or outside of the code review system. Code review is also not a good time for like architectural work at like a big level. That should also be communicated in an external way. When you go time to have your code review, people should already know sort of like the context of your code. Now, there may still be needs to critique some of the architectural decisions at like a tactical level in your code, but not, people should know why you sat down to write that code for the most part.
Right, totally.
The other thing is, the team has to be diligent about code reviews equally, because if some people are really into it and some people aren't, you can end up with the problem of like the very eager person has code out for review, but nobody else is eager about it, and so they don't do the reviews in a timely manner, and then that becomes a problem for various reasons. And it's on the same token, like on some teams I've been on, it's sort of one or two people are very passionate about sort of code cleanliness and code health, and they end up doing sort of the vast majority of the code reviews or have to be a part of all the code reviews. And there's a bunch of other people who don't do it. And I find that to not be good. That never ends up working well in the long term.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, to have a good code review kind of process, you have to have a good auto formatter. Because, I've seen so many code reviews devolve into like, add a space here, or put a comma here. And that ends up wasting like a lot of human time when you could have just written a program and some regexes and or used Clang format or something. If you don't have an auto formatter, then that should be your first priority.
Or at least a linter.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, or at least a linter that won't let you even start the code review without passing all the style checks. And then, as Patrick said, the code review is really, if you think that the whole architecture needs to be overhauled, that's a separate task. The code review is really, is there a bug that this person didn't see, or did they introduce a bad architecture that's going to sort of spiral out of control that just it materialized in that code review. But it's not the place to say, oh, I realized maybe we shouldn't have pointers anymore. Like that's not the thing you deal with in a code review.
Definitely, yeah.
There's many different ways to do code reviews. At the end of the day, they all involve kind of, soliciting feedback and receiving feedback. So it's really, they parallel sort of the way you communicate. You could a simple way is to just zip up your code, email it to someone, and they'll email you back some feedback. You could also go in person, like you could call someone over to your desk and just and I've actually done this even at companies where we had good tools. If I see that there's some kind of back and forth and it's not really going anywhere, then I'll just go to that person and I'll say, hey, can you just come to my desk and we'll step through this.
Yeah, I do that same reason. Like if I feel, not if something's going to be contentious per se, but like if I think something is going to potentially cause a bunch of questions, I'll bring people over in advance and sort of, walk them through and solicit the suggestions in person.
Yep. Yeah, totally. In person is actually really, really useful. This is kind of a side note, but if ever, an email thread, let's say, goes back and forth between the same two people, let's say more than twice, then you need to schedule a meeting, And the same is true for code reviews. Like if you say, I think it should be .h, and the person says, no, it should be .hpp, and you say, oh, well, here's a link to Stack Overflow where they say it should be .h. Like at that point, it needs to be done in person because those just don't really end well. And then last, they have a ton of different web tools. They're super powerful. This is the recommended way to do 99% of code reviews. I don't have a particular preference. Fabricator is a good one. Gerrit is another one. If you're using GitHub, the private GitHub, or if you're doing an open source project, or using the GitLab or Bitbucket or any of these tools, they have often a code review tool built into the whatever source control tool you're using. So that's good as well. At a high level, the web tools break down into two categories. One is it's basically just a better way to do the email version. Like you would send someone a link, they could click on the link, they could see sort of a graphical view of your code, they can make comments right there, but it's basically the same as the email. The other way, the GitHub way is where you actually make a merge request. And this sort of combines the code review with the kind of merge itself, all kind of in one step. So someone's approving, the quality of the code and also the fact that this code belongs in this code base right now. And I think both are equally good. So I think, there's 100 ways to skin the cat. But the important thing is to do the code reviews. So.
I will say that having some sort of web tool is enormously helpful. I've been in a couple teams, mostly a while ago. I think there's become better support for it recently, but where in-person code review used to be the way to do it, and everyone was expected to read the code in advance and sort of come with a set of questions or comments. And just like the sheer amount of bookkeeping and lack of desire to go through the code in advance really makes it a drag, where I really felt the quality of code reviews was much poorer with that approach. Now, as Jason said, using in-person to supplement, definitely. But as like the only way, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, totally. I think, 90% of code reviews should be done, either email or with one of these web tools. And the web tools are far faster. Most of them are integrated with your source control. So some of them, you literally just type in a command and boom, the code review is done. Like you type in a command with a few people's names and it does all the work for you. So, part of this is if you're, running your own company or running your own team, you have to, kind of set some guidelines for code reviews. One kind of nice guideline is this idea that everything has to be reviewed. I think this is in general a good strategy. I mean, almost everywhere, I think literally everywhere I've worked at has had this strategy, that you can't just start making changes. Now you can do like an emergency change if, let's say, it's 2 a.m. and you get paged and you have to fix something right now. But even then, if you do one of these sort of emergency commits that's not reviewed, it should send some kind of email so that someone can review it later.
I have been at places which didn't have this rule, and I think the problem is making lots of little change. There's sort of a tendency for people to make a bunch of little changes which they claim are not contentious or don't need review, but then over time they build up into something that really ought to have been reviewed and sort of flies under the radar because no change was too big.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I think also in addition to just code reviews, it's good to have these architectural reviews and things like that. Those are usually done in person. Like if you want to propose kind of a new kind of high level feature and things like that. Some places have this idea called readability. And so this is where you get somebody on your team or someone in your department who's really, really good at Python, let's say. And he's on the code review, but he's not really there to see if your code is doing what you were tasked to do. He's just there to look at the syntax and look at if you're using the language in the right way and things like that. So there's some companies who have that. Another thing is, some companies say, have one person approve. Some say have two people approve. I generally think one person is fine. I don't really see why you have to get two people to approve it, but maybe it depends. If some code is really mission critical, then it's good to have, as you add more pairs of eyes, you're going to catch more and more bugs.
Well, I've seen requiring two people in a way like a kind of more like a more senior person working with a more junior person. The more junior person may have more context on that specific thing, but you may want another sort of senior person to approve the change overall. But you still want the feedback from the more junior person because they have some contextual awareness, or vice versa.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
So basically, some people have more power than other people, or a similar way of saying that.
Yeah, I think another kind of rule is you try to keep the code reviews relatively small. So if, for example, so one thing that's really important, a lot of people know about is you can often, when you're using, let's say Git, you can do git add -p, and it will let you add part of your changes to a commit. So let's say, for example, I implemented a new way to get the index of some item, but then I also took this other part of the code and made it 10 times faster because I had to support the other thing. Well, those are really two different things. They might be tied together, but functionally, they're two different functions. You could have the speed up without having the first thing. And so that's where something like a git add -p or the equivalent, whatever source control you're using, like in Mercurial, it's HG split, is super useful because you could take part of it, you can make that a code review. Like, hey, Bob, can you review this speed up? I ran all the tests. They all give the same answer, but it's way faster. Can you look at this? Are there any mistakes? And then you could take the other half and you could give that to someone else or give it to Bob too, but at least as a separate code review. That makes it way better to read and makes it way more likely you'll get your reviews accepted.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than having someone work for like a month or however long, like a long period of time, get a giant code review. And then you have some like sort of naming, questions or clarifications or style change. And then the person, like the size of the code that they have to go fix when that comment comes in is just preponderous. Yep. On top of it, it's just really daunting to sit down and be like, I have to go through many thousands lines of code for this review. It makes it very hard to sit down and do the review.
Yeah, exactly. The other part is, another thing to mention is, and I think we've talked about this before, but if you find a bug in a piece of code, there's an extremely high chance there's another bug in that same code. It's just, I don't think there's a name for this. It's some phenomena, but basically, it's sort of like if you have the wrong mindset that created a bug somewhere, you created a lot of bugs in that place, almost for sure. And so by having the code reviews be kind of atomic, if one code review is having some problems, you can really focus on that and you're not blocking all these other code reviews. So yeah, that's code reviews in a nutshell. It sounds very kind of Dilbert-esque, right? Um, it sounds like TPS reports from Office Space or whatever. But it's actually it's super important. It's look at it as sort of a way of communicating, a way of sort of telling people what you're doing, getting feedback, giving feedback. I've definitely seen, especially now that they keep coming out with new versions of C++, I definitely see things in the code that I didn't even knew were possible, and so it's made me a better programmer, and it's highly recommended.
Yeah, I also want to say thank you to all of our listeners and all the people who have been sending us feedback, doing reviews, using our Audible trial, or donating on Patreon. We've been getting an enormous amount of support, and we just want to say thank you to all of our listeners.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And keep writing in. We try to answer every email, and I think we're doing a pretty good job. We had a bit of a backlog. We're mostly caught up now. And so thank you for all your feedback, and we'll see you next month.
The intro music is Axo by Binar Pilot. Programming Throwdown is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 2.0 license. You're free to share, copy, distribute, transmit the work, to remix, adapt the work, but you must provide attribution to Patrick and I, and share alike in kind.